So I'm Rob Sherwood, CTO of Platform Technologies at Big Switch Networks. And today I'm going to be talking to you about SwitchLite, our switch operating system. I'm going to throw in a cheap gag here. I apologize in advance. So 1996 was the first time I had enable access on a switch. And I typed commands that looked a lot like this. You know, these are commands you guys are probably familiar with. You add routes. You know, and critically, the reason why you guys are familiar with it is the same commands you would type today. And you know, what's really changed in this period? Has anything really changed in this period? And you know, the answer is a little bit's changed. You know, you used to telnet to this box, and now you SSH to it. But that's not, you know, and it's a cheap gag, and I apologize, but you know it's true, right? I mean, you know, if we look at the server world, and love to hear Ivan's take on this. You know, I had some thoughts on this. You know, the server world has come a long way, right? I used to run on a little CD-ROM drive and a little cable and plug into mid-sized tower things, but now, you know, we know that there's a whole swath of data center automation technologies, and you know, have they solved all the problems? No. It turns out you still need smart people to run this. At the same time, is it better than the networking world? Yes. And so, SwitchLite is our attempt to try to reconcile these two. So at its simplest point, SwitchLite is a Linux distribution for switches that has an OpenFlow agent on top of it. You guys will forgive my logo math, but you know, roughly speaking, Linux plus OpenFlow is SwitchLite. You know, we are trying to ride a trend that we see in networking, which is effectively the disaggregation of hardware. This is what Guido talked about, which is you can buy a box and you buy the software from somebody else. Or maybe you don't even buy the software. Maybe you download the open source version. And we think this is actually fundamentally very powerful as you start to see this ecosystem open up, as you start to see competition at the chip level, at the box level, at the OS level, at the application level, you start to see a world that starts to look a lot more like the server world. And we think that, you know, a lot of the management and a lot of the innovation in the network will be unlocked by horizontalizing this market. Why did we do this? You know, so a big reason is not for money, right? You know, so we have basically found, you know, through the products that we've been building, that we weren't getting the feature velocity that we wanted out of third-party vendors. And it's true for some of our products and less for others. So you'll see when Kyle talks about BigTap, you know, our monitoring fabric, we actually can use third-party switches because it doesn't stress OpenFlow too much on that, and that works pretty well. But as we start talking about the cloud fabric, the BVS product, we'll actually see that we'll be leading fairly forward with OpenFlow, and we'll actually be pushing the boundaries of OpenFlow. And we actually really needed to do this work ourselves rather than wait 6 or 8 months for vendors to catch up. So if you look at how long it's taken for people to start to adopt 1.3, and we're leading forward from 1.3, it really just made a lot of sense for us to move into this space. And so, the last...
Actually, is SwitchLite an OS in itself, or is it just an OpenFlow agent?
I've got the next slide will show exactly that. The thing I wanted to mention before I moved off of this is we've been doing, you know, this white box bare metal. So I'm actually careful to say bare metal switches instead of white box, because I actually think they're subtly different. So when you buy a server, a lot of people buy a brand name server, like Dell, right? Some other people buy off-brand servers, and we think that distinction will actually exist in the switching world. Like you could, in theory, buy, you know, a Dell-based or somebody like that, a brand name disaggregated switch, and that's what we're calling a bare metal switch. It's not a no-name brand. And you know, yes, there'll be a market for a no-name brand, and different customers will want different things. But you know, that's why it's important to talk about, you know, what I think it's important to talk about a bare metal switch. And what's interesting to me, we've been doing this for 5 years now. Our office network is run exclusively on these things. Something happened in the last year, and I can make guesses as to what, you know, whether it's the Google switch or what have you. Customers have actually started coming to us and say, we want this thing, how do we get into it? And you start to see other companies come into this where they're providing the operating system, and we actually feed onto each other and compete with each other, and that's good. We're actually enabling this ecosystem. So, you know, the market has, at least for some customers, and maybe not all customers, but for some customers, they actually want this. And so, in terms of what is it, this is the answer here. So I've got a color-coded slide here. Ooh, I've even got a laser pointer. All of this color light blue is stock Linux. So if you download the SwitchLite image, You get an SSH daemon, you get a fan control daemon. I was tweaking it before the show. Apologies, I didn't tweak it any better. We got a network times server client, speak standard syslog. We build off of net SNMP, which is a standard SNMP agent. It's extensible, so we've actually extended it to attach it into our OpenFlow agent. And so it's not just an OpenFlow agent, to answer your question, but that's the only thing that's kind of novel here. Like everything else is stock Linux. And so poking into our OpenFlow agent, Indigo, which is the core of it, it's actually common for both SwitchLite for Broadcom, for our ASIC-based platform, and also for our virtual switch. So that's kind of the core OpenFlow state machine. Then it has a driver to talk to proprietary ASIC drivers. We actually shipped that driver in a binary form. We can't, unfortunately, open source that. But Indigo itself is open sourced. And also, the virtual switch stuff is all open source. So you can actually go to our website and download this code, right? So I don't know if the hotel wireless will support it, but don't everybody download this at the same time. But so Indigo is the core OpenFlow agent. We can supply the source for that. We don't give out the source for the ASIC bit because we can't. It's under NDA. But you can download the virtual switch, the Indigo virtual switch, and that builds off of stock OpenFlow bits.
So if you go to the previous slide, would this whole thing run on the switch, or would this be a controller?
What was the second part of that?
Or would it be a controller?
So this whole thing runs on the switch, and as you can see from my handy little arrow here.
Yeah.
So more to the point, everything in this box is running on the switches right there.
So because people are lazy in implementing OpenFlow on their hardware, you're doing that instead of them.
I wouldn't use the word lazy. There's actually some real technical difficulties.
I believe it.
Let's say that so think of it as, I get a crazy idea in my head of let's use the tables this way. How long does it take to get that into a customer environment? And this has dramatically increased that.
So is this all designed around ODMs? I mean, you're talking Quanta and what?
And so that's my point about bare metal switching. There are a lot of people interested in it. Right now, only the ODMs are as publicly interested in it, but I think that will change over time.
All right. The reality is the ODMs are spinning everything for all the other manufacturers anyway.
Exactly.
So my question sort of is at what point do you guys see, and there's obviously an erosion portion of the business that goes on with introducing something like this in the market. What's going to be the effect long term in terms of Quanta and others coming out with suite offerings that are that are you going to allow third-party branding on top, or do you even care at that point?
So we don't even care. We don't sell hardware.
Right.
We have a hardware compatibility list. Long term, if I had to guess how this is going to evolve, we'll see something like what happened in the PC market when people started the IBM clones. You have a whole swath of clones, and a couple will bubble up to the top. And if you look at the people who were successful in the clone market, here's a hint, guys: a switch is a PC with extra bits in it. And so the people who already know how to build PCs will be the first to jump on this market. Sure. Right. So you had a question, Brett?
Yeah. Is there a stock OS there?
It's Linux. Yeah. So it's the Linux kernel.
Particular distribution, though.
We actually build off of a specific distribution. That's really not the mainstay of this. I mean, it's Ubuntu.
Kind of what I'm getting at is, if I can have, people with binaries and where I pull down, an apt-get install something.
I apt-get install stuff on the switch all the time. The only catch is, at least for these switches, is that it's a PowerPC chip, and so if you had an x86 in here, you could apt-get anything you wanted. It comes down to what people have built the binaries for the PowerPC side of things, it's honestly not the end of the world, and I haven't found anything substantial that's missing. But if you wanted to run, I don't know, a Flash plugin or something like that, that gets to be a little bit annoying. Right. Running Flash plugins off your switch, we'll leave that for a separate point. But
will this support Mac Learning by default if you load?
So what's interesting is the policy of what you do with this is a completely orthogonal thing. So some applications will do Mac Learning, some will not. Neither of the two that I'm talking about here today will, but we've got some other things up our sleeve that will.
And what if you're using...
This is just the agent, remember.
This is just the agent. And so talking about leaning forward with OpenFlow, having messages that enable Mac learning and things like that. Those are things that we're looking at.
I'm saying if you're calling it a Switch OS, I just wonder is Switch OS for OpenFlow environments or just a Switch OS?
For OpenFlow environments. This doesn't do any of the standard. So if you contrast this with other people who are building this, you'd want to see router daemons, you'd want to see all the SNMP stuff. We're not doing any of that. This is just OpenFlow.
For example, Cumulus, you can take that OpenFlow agent Indigo part and load it on a Cumulus box if you wanted to.
Or you could certainly do that, but what it's actually an appeal to customers is with other companies like this, you can buy the hardware and not have to bet on OpenFlow and SDN. You might think, okay, this is a good idea, let me give it a try, but know that there's more traditional switch operating systems out there for people to fall back to if it doesn't work out. No, I mean, I think it's going to work out.
So what you're saying is you can load Linux on your server.
Yeah.
And if you don't like Linux, you can go back to Windows.
Yes, exactly. And there'll be things that will be, I think we'll talk about afterwards that look a lot like dual boot.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, by the way, look at this like a line card.
Yes. And we can have an interesting conversation about what's fundamentally different between a controller and a series of top-of-rack switch versus a chassis-based switch.
Yeah. The backplane.
Yeah.
Like fundamentally, it's kind of, I mean, when you first look at it, it's like, well, why don't we do this today, right? I mean, it's kind of the Mac versus the PC thing. So
Yeah.
the Mac differentiates in these applications. Like, I don't think there's enough richness in in the switch itself to show that differentiation. So I really do believe in this model. What are the applications outside of just like analytics and performance monitoring and things?
So
is there anything else?
let me punt that to the other 2/3 of our stuff, because less so with BigTap, the next thing we'll talk about, but much more with BVS. We would not be able to do this without at least somebody doing this work. And one could imagine wedging, and so actually it's maybe worth dwelling on. This is a technical detail that gets lost in a lot of people, but I think you guys would appreciate it. The really hard part about implementing 1.3 is actually implementing 1.3 so it doesn't step on your existing switch features. It turns out it's very hard to virtualize an ASIC, right, to split a table in half. Right. But if you don't want to do that, if you just want to start from scratch, that's a fundamentally easier proposition. And so that's where we're starting from, and that's a lot of why.
Do you have a slide on tables, and are you doing TTPs and how you're breaking it up?
I wish I could. All of that is strict NDA.
Got it.
I would love to. I can talk to you guys afterwards about where you can find information where NDA is slipped. Yeah.
Here's an easy one. How is this different from Cumulus?
That piece. To the best of my knowledge, they don't have an OpenFlow agent. It might be something they're adding. You'd have to add them. But fundamentally, it comes back to, because it's hard to virtualize the chip, it's easy to do OpenFlow or a traditional stack. It's very hard to do them both at the same time.
So they're building a switch, you're building a line card, sort of.
Well, so we're also, so for this part,
Yeah,
we're just building a switch. Yeah. For the larger software, the next two things we'll talk about, we're building a line card.
Okay.
Actually, I like the analogy. If this is a line card, then your entire network would be one big switch. Is that
Yes. So you guys laugh,
we
but
will
he's been
debate
thinking about that for years.
He's been working on that joke for quite a while.
Yeah.
The thing that I like about that, this is, you can now go into, you could buy a switch and put Cumulus on it and have the legacy networking, your spanning tree, your Trill, your BGPs, all that stuff. You do that. Or you can say, well, I'm going to switch my network over to OpenFlow now, and I'm going to wipe the Cumulus off and then run Switch Lite. And now I've got an OpenFlow network.
Well, that's the thing. Do you have to get rid of Cumulus software, or can you load Indigo in parallel to Cumulus software?
Well, this is the point, right? You have to understand the packet path inside the switch. You don't want the way that the TCAMs and the BCAMs and all that architecture inside the silicon. You can't feed OpenFlow data into the silicon for forwarding and have spanning tree and BGP flow entries in the same space. The way that the internal guts of the chips are put together, they can't. They're orthogonal. They just don't mix, right?
Think of it like running Windows and Linux on the same chip at the same time, right? Whether it's in protected mode or not is a fundamental decision. The chip can only be in one mode or the other. Right. And it's that type of thing.
But I'm saying it can be done, right? A lot of the papers from Stanford way back in the day, right? This port is OpenFlow enabled, this port isn't. What I'm seeing here is it's either all or nothing, right?
Well, so all or nothing is easier. It absolutely can be done. there's a whole bunch of kind of global settings for each of these switch chips, which have to be one way or the other. And if it's one way, you only support some class of things. So a quick example is, do you allow L3 to egress the port it ingressed on? It's a global setting on a chip. And for some cases, you want to enable that, and some you want to disable that.
There's only one control plane for the ASIC port.
Yes.
I think actually Rob is modest here. He wrote the core paper about how to virtualize switches, and I think we learned a lot about about how to do this and how not to do this, because it turns out that if you really want to squeeze the maximum performance out of these switching chips, right, the closer you get to the limit, the harder it is to virtualize anything. If you take a very high-level abstraction that makes the whole switch look very simple, right, you can't virtualize. If you really start drilling down, say this, this is all these different features that interact in a complex way, it becomes more or less impossible to just virtualize on the switch.
So
big difference between
Jason is like Highlander. There can only be one.
Yeah.
Well, think of it like you would run ESX, and then you would run other things on top. You wouldn't run Windows and Linux at the same
on
time.
the same chip at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
There's a fundamental difference between a hypervisor, which doesn't have to do things in real time. Right? If you overload the CPU or if you overload the memory and you have to page out to disk, the software just runs slower, but nothing stops working. In networking, you've got 6.5 nanoseconds at 10 gigabits per second for a packet to come off the wire before the next one arrives. So if you're going to update the TCAM table, you've got 6.5 nanoseconds to do it. And if you don't, everything dies, right? There's a fundamental technology difference between networking and server things. And this is where a lot of people come unstuck. They think, oh, I understand virtualization because I understand server virtualization, and VMware's made it look deceptively simple. But in networking, we're stuck with a real-time operating system that's working at nanosecond granularity. You can't expect that to do, to just stop, hang on, I'm going to reload the CAM table because it needs to be refreshed, and I've got 6.5 nanoseconds to do it.
I love this conversation and definitely want to continue it.
Yep.
A bunch of us worked really hard to do a bunch of demos. We can definitely come back to this, because like I said, it's something I'm very passionate about. So you can download the source. All right, so I'm going to show you 3 things on a demo today, and I'll show them to you quickly, just in the interest of time. I'm going to show you zero-touch networking, which is to say we're going to turn on a switch that has 0 configuration on it. It's going to PXE boot and download everything on the fly for you. And just to translate this from the last conversation, if you want to download a different operating system, this is the way you could do it. And then I'm going to walk you through some of the basics of the CLI, just to show you it really is basic. There's actually very, very little there by design. And last, just to show you something kind of fun, we're going to do some dynamic multipathing where I get Jason to plug in a bunch of cables on the fly and show you how it makes the traffic go better. So for those who can't see the rack, and you appreciate you guys working through the noise, what we have over here is we have 2 switches with a single link between them connected to 4 servers. They're actually VMs, but details. And so what's going to happen, I'm going to show you guys, is that the traffic between these things is actually bottlenecked on that link. All right. And one of my VMs, I need to refresh this, I think. I refreshed it anyways. But so what we're going to do is, first we're going to turn on a new switch. We'll say, OK, we need extra capacity. It's coming. It's just, it's not well, it's a demo code. It's not well-written JavaScript. It's going to come. Jason has assured me that it's going to come.
The demo seems similar to what was done at ONS, I guess, a few months ago. Has much changed within SwitchLite since then?
So a lot of it has gotten hardened, certainly at a feature level. Not a lot has changed. What's going to be different from this demo is actually going to go into a lot more of the detail. So note that, so ignore these switches. We've got leaf 1 and spine 1. We're missing leaf 2. What I'm going to do is jump over to the serial console, and Jason is going to power up leaf 2, and I'm going to walk you guys through the boot up sequence. All right, there we go. So it takes a while for the serial to initialize. But so what we're going to see here is a switch, effectively DHCP and then PXE boot. And as it PXE boots, it gets a parameter, which is a URL, which downloads the. It really does work. I've done this demo so many times. Anyways, It downloads the kernel image and the configuration live effectively from a web server. I'll walk you through some of the CLI. There are like 8 CLI commands in terms of show controller. Let's just log into the switch directly. We'll log into one of the other switches. Anyways, if we don't show it, that's fine. The end of the day, you can actually download a lot of this, so you don't have to take my word for it now. Ooh. It really is there. It really does work. All right, whatever. Moving on. So, I was going to show you effectively show run and config off of the switch. The only information that's in there's a host, a user secret, a host name, some basic IP configuration, what the SNMP MIBs are. We do have support for SNMP. It's not a lot of the MIBs. It's kind of the interface MIBs and a bunch of things that are fairly standard. By design, the controller is actually pulling most of the information you'd want out of the switch anyways and exposing that through SNMP, so that it's working at a higher level. There's the controller information. Most of the diagnostic commands are show controller, which is is it live? Which of the controllers is the primary and which is the backup? There's some fan control information. But at the end of the day, the purpose is actually to show that there's not much there. Questions so far about this, or you're just going to log in for a switch for me? It's admin. The user is admin.
Password is password.
Password's password.
Password's BSN. Come on. It's BSN. All right. I'll show you the CLI at least. There must be some problem with the serial cable. We're using one of those fancy, and for web stuff, we're using one of those fancy JavaScript serial converter things, and it's supposed to work. But anyways, so if I run show running config, you see there's a host name, there's some local information about the DNS name and the management interface. There's some user information. SSH is enabled, Telnet's disabled. We set up a time server. SNMP is disabled by default, and we tell you there's this is your controller, this is your data path ID, and this is some information that we pass up in the switch description. In terms of show commands, you've got show controller. It says you've got one controller here, it's connected, and this is currently the master. There's not much there. If you drop into enable and you type debug bash, you end up at a standard Linux prompt. There's not much running on here. So you've got udev, got syslog, got the fan control, the OpenFlow daemon. Do you guys have questions about this, or is this just as unexciting as I intend it to be?
You got it right.
Yep.
Right.
It's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about this idea that the operating system on a switch is not a sacred cow. It's just an operating system
Exactly.
with some software in it.
Well, and more to the point, it should be an operating system you're familiar with.
Yes.
Right, to Brent's point, if you wanted to add some extra piece of software, you could apt-get it onto the system.
Yes.
I think another point here is once you've got this switch connected to the controller, how much time are you really going to spend at this command line?
Exactly, and so kind of our mental model for what gets put on the switch is what do you need to debug this in terms of the hardware, and in terms of figuring out am I connected to the controller or not, and so. The idea, so one of the customer requirements we had was under 12 CLI commands. And I think it was, it was under 10 and we got to 12. And so, while the serial terminal didn't work, the zero-touch networking part did. Yeah. Right, the idea is there's no config that really needs to be stateful on here.
Well, I mean, think of so today, if you want to, let's say, use whatever your favorite modeling language is, whether it's OVSDB, some kind of REST, whatever you want to use, instead of you now waiting on your hardware vendor to either rev the hardware or a year later for a Fortune 20 to request the feature and then you'll get it, You just now are building on existing code and you apply the agent. I mean, computing is actually not reinventing the wheel every time we want to do something, right?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, is Big Switch better at building operating systems like a Linux distribution better than anyone? Maybe, but we don't need to be. We're a startup, right? There's a whole lot of things that you guys know and love to do on your servers that you'd love to do on your switches, right? I mean, how much work, you probably all have your favorite host monitoring system, whether it's, I don't know,
Nagios.
Nagios or what have you. And, do we need to support that? No. Right? There's a long tail of these things. You guys just deploy it like you would on any other machine. It's better for everyone. All right.
I have a total Pixie noob question.
Sure.
Does the switch need to download the code every time it boots, or is it once it's loaded, then it's just always going to load that?
So it's actually we can do both. So it actually comes.
It's kind of a bootstrapping problem there if you have a problem with the network and your switch not being able to.
Something that we can talk about maybe a bit later. You need a critical bootloader piece, and that's the thing that needs to be static. And actually, that's the thing you really want to have standardized, so that there's not the Big Switch version of this box with the Big Switch SKU versus somebody else's SKU. That's something we can talk about a bit later. In terms of what we persist on here, some of the boxes actually have persistent compact flash, but it's one of the, like compact flash, you want to be careful how often you write to it. Right now, I believe only the bootloader is static and everything else is dynamically downloaded. The entire image is, I think it's about 100K, like the binary, so it's not that bad.
Hey Rob, what are you using for managing it?
Managing?
Yeah.
How do you, SSH, OpenFlow?
Yeah, I mean, are you putting anything in there to have a central point to manage all the devices?
That's the controller, right? And so.
Okay. So you can't provision with OpenFlow, right?
No. So the idea is.
What's the mechanism?
There's nothing you need to actually touch on this switch. And so I don't know if folks saw the ONS, we actually took it out of a box and turned it on. They're really, maybe you have to take my word for it, there's no configuration, but it does support SNMP, and so you can hook this up into your SNMP monitoring system so you can see when it goes down. Maybe I'm not taking it.
Well, it sounds like this isn't geared to be a VTEP. Let me say that.
Sorry?
It's not geared to be a VTEP.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Other questions? I'm actually thinking, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the other two parts of the demo. This is kind of the interesting thing. The other. So I'm sorry. It's just the last part of the demo where we were going to effectively repeat what we did at ONS, where we showed you that if there's traffic flowing, we can plug in some more cables, and the traffic dynamically moves to those. As long as you guys kind of nod and take my word for it, we can move on to some of the other interesting stuff. All right. With that in mind, I think I will hand off to my colleague Kyle, and he's going to tell you about BigTab.
Great.
Just wondering.
You'll have to advance through some of my slides.
Oops. Go one back. Go one back.
Oh yes, that's an important slide that I forgot. So, my marketing folks tell me to say, Switchlight makes things cheaper and simpler, and it really fundamentally does.
I was not interested in that bullet, the other two.
Sure, we can sell a lot of time here. So, if you get BigTab from us right now, you have an option of getting third-party switches, and we have a hardware compatibility list, and Kyle will talk all about this. Or you can get with Switchlight. It is we support it. It is a full, generally available product with BigTab. With BVS, there's additional things that we're doing. There's additional development work. We're basically enhancing the OpenFlow daemon. That won't be available until in beta into Q4.